Greetings to all of you, this is Dr. Lisa, and today's talk is about Marxism approach in international relations. Although many believe that Marxist approach is no longer relevant in the international relations since the domination and the prevail of the mainstream theories of realism and liberalism and the collapse of communism in the early of 1990. My personal opinion is that this approach might revive itself, looking at the critical reality of capitalism. According to Professor Richard Wolff, American capitalist empire is declining. So the question here, if capitalism as an economic system collapses, what would be the alternative? In that sense, Marxism in IR is essential to be studied. In my previous lecture, New Liberalism, I've talked about the decline of global capitalist liberalism. You can go and watch that video so you can get better understanding to our talk today. However, you may find this lecture and the previous one on New Liberalism answers to your questions related to the global economy politics. For example, why do we see people like Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla and the CEO of SpaceX? His net worth in 2022 estimated about $300 billion, according to the Forbes, the ranking of the world's richest people. According to the World Bank, Musk's net worth exceeds the GDP of 5 countries of Colombia, Finland, Pakistan, Chile, and Portugal. Let me give you another example. In 2022, the famous American company Apple related $2 trillion. So the market value of Apple has become higher than the gross domestic product of many developed countries, including Italy, Brazil, and South Korea, to name a few. So all these contradictions in the world politics, which is really confusing for most of the people, we'll try in today's lecture to study and analyze. Let's speak first about the critical theory in studying international relations and why do we consider Marxism as a critical approach. You have to know that the landscape of international politics and global affairs has witnessed the emergence of the critical perspectives that challenge the traditional mainstream views, basically realism and liberalism. These critical perspectives share 2 fundamental characteristics. Firstly, they adopt of a positive approach, recognizing the intricate connection between the subject and object, the theory and the practice. In a sense, these perspectives acknowledge that the theories are constructed with a particular interest and purposes in mind. Secondly, critical perspectives seek to dismantle the existing global or the status quo and question the norms, the values, and assumptions upon which it is founded. In contrast to mainstream theories, critical theories expose the inequalities and power imbalances that often go unnoticed in the world. Realism and liberalism are 2 dominated paradigms in international relations, are viewed by critical theories as concealing or legitimizing the existing power structure in the world. Critical perspectives are therefore inherently emancipatory, aiming to challenge and overthrow oppression, while aligning themselves with the interests of marginalized and exploited groups. Among the key critical perspectives on global politics are Marxism and Neomarxism, which we will talk about today, constructivism, feminism, green politics, and post-colonialism. Let's start now with Marxism. Marxism has traditionally been viewed as the principal critical or the alternative to mainstream realist and liberalist thinking. It is a very broad field which encompasses, as far as international theory is concerned, on two tendencies. The first one concentrates on the economic analysis, which is mainly concerned with exposing capitalism as a system of a class oppression that operates on national and international levels. This applies to classical Marxism and to most forms of Neomarxism. The second tendency emphasizes on the ideological and cultural dimension of oppression and has come to embrace a post-positive and therefore post-Marxism mode of theorizing. This applies to what has been called critical theory, as influenced by the ideas of Gramsci and the so-called Frankfurt School. Now, starting with the classical Marxism, you have to know that Marxism is a philosophy of history, suggests that capitalism is doomed, and socialism and eventually communism are destined to replace it. The basic of this philosophy is the materialistic conception of history. What does that mean? Well, it means that economic factors are the ultimately determining force in the history. In Marx's view, history is driven forward through a dialectical process in which internal contradictions within each mode of production reflected in a class conflict lead to social revolution and the construction of a new and higher mode of production. This process was characterized by a series of historical stages, which are slavery, feudalism, and capitalism, and so on, and would only end with the establishment of a classless communist society. For Marx, capitalist development nevertheless always had a marked transnational character, leading some to regard him as an early hyper-globalist theorist, where Marx saw that the desire for profit would drive capitalism to strive to tear down every barrier to intercourse and conquer the whole earth for its market. And that's exactly what is happening with the global capitalism nowadays. Look at the transnational companies and cooperation. So, Marxism School in International Relations is a critical approach that seeks to understand and analyze the dynamics of the international system through the lens of historical materialism and the class struggle. It draws on the foundational ideas of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who developed the philosophy of historical materialism and the theory of communism. At its core, Marx's theory emphasizes the role of economic factors, specifically the mode of production and the resulting classes' relations in shaping the behavior of the state and the structure of the international system. According to Marx's theory, the capitalist mode of production is central to understanding the global politics and the distribution of power among states. Vladimir Lenin's famous work, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, published in mid-1970, he portrayed imperialism as an essentially economic phenomenon, reflecting domestic capitalism's quest to maintain profit levels through the export of surplus capital. This in turn would bring major capitalist powers into conflict with one another. He attributed the First World War being essentially an imperialist war, in a sense that it was fought for the control of colonies in Africa, Asia, and elsewhere. Having said that, now let's explore some of the key themes in Marxism. First one, economic determinism. Marx's theory believed that economic factors are the primary drivers of historical change. The mode of production, characterized by the ownership and control of the means of production, determines the social relations and power structures within a society. While in international contexts, Economic forces shape the behavior of states and the dynamics of the global system. Second one, class struggle. Marxism emphasizes the role of a class struggle as a driving force in history. According to Marx, history is a series of class struggles between the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, and the working class, proletariat. In the international arena, class struggle is manifest in the competition and conflict between capitalist states and their respective ruling classes. Third one, imperialism and capitalist expansion. Marxists argue that the inherent nature of capitalism leads to imperialism and the expansion of capitalist powers into other regions of the world. Imperialism is seen as a means for capitalist state to secure resources, markets, and labor for their economic growth and to maintain the dominance in the international system. Fourth one, overthrow of capitalism. Marxists ultimately envision the overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of socialism and communism as a means to achieve a more equitable and just global order. They argue that capitalist system perpetuate exploitations and inequality in the world, and only through a revolutionary transformation can a classless society be achieved. Marxism in international relations has inspired various strands of thought, known as Neomarxism, which incorporates dependency theory and war system theory. Neomarxism in international relations is an extension and adaptation to the traditional Marxist theory to address some of its perceived limitations and contemporary challenges in understanding global politics. Neo-Marxist perspectives emerged during the 1970s and 1980s as scholars sought to integrate Marxist insight with other social theories and to examine issues beyond the traditional focus on economic factors. Like traditional Marxism, Neo-Marxism emphasizes the importance of structural inequalities in shaping international relations. It examines how the global capitalist system perpetuates and produces social, economic, and political inequalities between states and within societies. A significant strand of neo-Marxist thought is dependency theory. This theory came as a response to modernization theory, which is an early theory of development. Modernization suggested that all societies progress through similar stages of development, meaning that today's underdeveloped areas are thus in a similar situation to that of today's developed areas at some time in the past, and that therefore the task in helping the underdeveloped areas out of poverty is to accelerate them along this supposed common path of development by various means such as closer integration into the world market, investment, and technology transfers. Well, dependency theory rejected this view, arguing that we can't look at the underdeveloped countries as merely preemptive versions of developed countries, because they have unique features and structures of their own, and importantly, are in the situation of being the weaker members in the world market economy. Dependency theorists argue that underdeveloped countries are dependent on the advanced capitalist countries for investment, technology, and markets, leading to their economic and political subordination. Accordingly, this theory seeks to explain the relationship between developed and developing countries, focusing on the exploitative nature of these connections. Dependency theory developed in the 1950s and 1960s by Latin American scholars, such as Raúl Prebisch, who was the director of United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America. He conducted a research, concluded that the increases in the wealth of the richer nations appeared to be at the expense of the poorer ones. Another prominent scholar of this theory is André Jonder Frank. Some of his prominent work is The Development of Underdevelopment, published in 1966, and Capitalism and Underdevelopment in Latin America, published in 1967, and considered as the formative text in dependency theory. So, dependency theory challenges the traditional views of international relations and offers an alternative perspective on global economic interactions. The basic argument of dependency theory is the notion that resources flow from periphery of poor and underdeveloped states to a core of wealthy states, enriching the latter at the expense of the former. It's the central connection of dependency theory that the poor states are impoverished and rich ones enriched by the way that poor states are integrated into the world system. Dependency theory suggested that a global economic system is characterized by uneven distribution of power and resources, favoring the advanced and industrialized nations at the expense of the less developed countries. This creates a situation of dependency, where the developing nation became reliant on the developed ones for their economic growth and well-being. Now let's explore some of the key aspects of dependency theory. First one, core periphery structure. Dependency theorists argued that the world can be divided into core and periphery. The core represents the advanced industrialized nations, such as United States, European countries, and Japan, which control all means of production, technology, and capital. While periphery, on the other hand, includes the less developed nations, often found in Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, which provide cheap labor, raw materials, and markets for the core. Example of that would be the relationship between United States and Mexico, is a classical illustration of the core periphery structure. The US, as a core country, benefits from the cheap labor and markets in Mexico. In contrast to it, as a periphery relies heavily on the US for trade, investment, and job opportunities for its citizens. Second one, unequal exchange. Dependency theorists argue that international trade is inherently exploitative. Developed nations have the upper hand in settling price in raw materials and commodities, often taking advantage of unequal bargaining power of developing countries. For example, the export of African raw materials and minerals such as natural gas, diamond, uranium, copper, and cobalt. Countries like France, US, and UK are exploiting these resources by taking it relatively in low prices to developed countries. These countries in turn process these raw materials into finished goods, which they sell it back to the developing countries at much higher prices, repairing significant profits. Let me give you a vivid example of that. In 2017, Sky News has published an investigation report which exposed the brutal slave conditions and the child labor practiced by major corporations such as Apple, Samsung, and Sony to extract the cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo. For your information, cobalt is one of the most precious minerals in the world for the technology industry, and the majority of the world supply is found in Congo. Still, this country is one of the poorest in the world. The report also has spoken about the children as young as 4 years old working in the mines, crippling health issues linked to fumes. And they are paid for this deadly work equivalent to around a dime for a day. The report has also found that no country requires companies to regulate or publicly disclose information about their cobalt supply chains. I think this example have helped you to understand the approach of Marxist and Neo-Marxist related theory of dependency. Now let's explain other key theme in dependency theory, which is neo-colonialism. If you think that such terms has become an old fashion, I will invite you to watch this video on Burkina Faso president speech during the second Russian-African summit held in July 2023.
Les questions que mes générations se posent sont les suivantes, si je peux me résumer. C'est de ne pas comprendre comment l'Afrique, avec tant de richesses sur notre sol, avec une nature généreuse, de l'eau, du soleil en abondance, l'Afrique est aujourd'hui le continent le plus pauvre. L'Afrique est un continent affamé. Et comment se fait-il que les chefs d'État traversent donc le monde à mendier? Voici des questions que nous nous posons et que nous n'avons pas de réponse jusque-là. Nous avons l'occasion de tisser de nouvelles relations. Et j'espère que ces relations puissent être les meilleures pour donner un meilleur avenir à nos peuples. Pour ce qui concerne le Burkina Faso, aujourd'hui nous sommes confrontés depuis plus de 8 ans à la forme de manifestation la plus barbare, la plus violente du néocolonialisme, de l'impérialisme. L'esclavage qu'on tend encore à nous imposer.
So even after formal colonial rule ended, developed nations continue to exert control over their former colonies through economic and political means. Like Burkina Faso, many African countries gained independence from their colonial rulers in the mid of the 20th century. However, they still face economic domination by the former colonial powers or even other developed countries, resulting in continued dependency and limited sovereignty. Let me give you an example. By the end of the Second World War, France had to accept the formal independence of its colonies in Africa, but with conditions. France has stipulated conditions in which imposed the obligation to use CFA, African francs, as the new colonial currency. And moreover, it made the new independent countries pay for infrastructures built by France during the colonial period. 14 African countries, which are former France colonies, continued to pay the colonial tax to France since their so-called independence. By establishing the Commonwealth of French-speaking countries, France prevents its former colonies from breaking their ties with Paris. Last key theme in dependency theory is external debt. Developing countries often accumulate substantial external debt to finance their developing projects. However, these loans often come with high interest rates and stringent conditions imposed by international financial institutions, leading to a cycle of debt dependency. For example, several Latin American countries have experienced a debt crisis due to borrowing from international lenders such as International Monetary Fund and World Bank. These nations became trapped in a cycle of borrowing to repay previous debts, leading to economic instability and limited capacity for sustainable development. With that, I will be concluding my lecture for today, in which we have spoken about Marxism and Neo-Marxism theory, in specifying on dependency theory. In next lecture, we will continue speaking about Neo-Marxism theory, in which we will explain about the word system theory and some of the criticism to Marxism theory. Take care and see you next time.